Hey, folks, welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa. This is Chris in central Pennsylvania, and we have a special guest once again. This is a congressional candidate there in eastern Tennessee, Robbie Starbuck. Some of you may have heard of this gentleman, and you may even know the story about his surname, which always puzzled me because I think he's a Cuban-American. His family got out of Cuba, but Starbuck doesn't sound like a very Cubano name to me. So, Robbie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you? It's actually Middle Tennessee, my district.
Oh, Middle Tennessee.
We have a mutual friend that's in East Tennessee, but yes, Middle Tennessee for my district.
There you go. My error. Thank you for correcting. That's actually important. You're going to get reelected in the correct congressional district, to say the least.
Yep.
But now you're originally, I think, out on the West Coast, and you moved to Tennessee not all that long ago. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I moved here. It was a little over 3 years ago. So I mean, to me, it feels like it's been. I mean, this kind of feels like it should have always been our home, but unfortunately, because of career, lived in California, worked in the industry there. So that's where we came from. My wife's actually originally from Texas, so she was always clamoring for us to go take the kids to the South. And we had fallen in love with Tennessee previously just because we had been here for couples trips and stuff like that. And my wife's a songwriter. So we'd both been out here for work quite a bit. And we knew this was the place we eventually wanted to buy a farm and retire. But as things just got crazier and crazier in our country, we knew we don't want to raise our kids anywhere but in a place that has our shared values. And that's not going to be a place like California. So, that's what, largely predicated the change.
Well, I certainly understand that. When you say 3 years, that's actually like donkey years to me. 36 and a half years in the military. I've moved 27, 28 times. So 3 years is an eternity. So I get your point about it seems like you've been there a long time. 3 years is a long time. Actually, and from a same standpoint, I get where you're coming from. Having lived all over the country and around the world, 23 of my 36 years overseas, I've lived in many places in the States, including California and Arizona, many places on the West Coast. And when the Army sent me to the Army War College and my last assignment was when I retired, I discovered in the time I spent here that people in central Pennsylvania sort of have Midwestern values for the most part. The culture is very similar. People tend to get along and they believe in faith and family, and those things are important to them. So I kind of fit right in. So I appreciate where you're coming from, Tennessee. My brother lives down in the Nashville area, and he's found a very good life down there. He's really enjoyed his time in Tennessee. So how have you found Tennessee? I assume it's to your liking.
Oh, we love it. I mean, this is, like I said, home. Like, this is where our heart is. Our values are so aligned with everybody. I mean, we're best buds with our neighbors and I mean, you couldn't ask for a better life for a kid. Our kids grow up out in nature and, ride horses and ATVs. And, I get to go take them out in our backyard and shoot. I mean, you can't do that in California. So it's a lot of fun. It's just, it's built around the right values: family, faith, freedom. That should be the basis of America. That should be the most, sort of simple qualification for being a state in the United States of America. But unfortunately, it's now the harder thing to find, and so especially throughout all this COVID craziness. So, I couldn't be happier. I've never been happier in my life than us living here. I mean, just everything. I think, what's interesting that I think would be good for a lot of people to hear who have never been to the South. And there's a lot of people like this in places like California or, up in New York, other places along those lines. They get sort of sold this idea that the South is this place where there's nothing to do and there's nowhere to go. And honestly, maybe we should keep it that way so they don't come down here. But we have everything. We have everything. It's, it's everything you could ever want, especially if you enjoy an outdoor lifestyle. Like, we've got lakes, we've got mountains, we've got everything. We've got woods everywhere. You got stuff to do everywhere. There's shops everywhere, beautiful attractions, beautiful development. I mean, it's everything you could want. And I think that the idea a lot of people from these, metropolitan areas have is so divorced from what the reality actually is here.
Well, I'd have to agree with you. And one thing I definitely say is about Tennessee, it's a stunning natural beauty. You've got mountains, you've got the river in the west there. You've got lots of historical sites to see and great history there in the area. It's quite a lovely place. But let me ask you this question. Now, you kind of blew up and became known around the country. I had not heard of you, and someone I know close to me said, Robbie Starbuck, you got to check in this guy. This guy's amazing. He used to be like a Democrat. Now he's conservative. Is that a fair description of you? Did you used to be a Democrat and now you're conservative, or have people misstated that?
No, I'm not sure where they got that. I was not a Democrat. Being Cuban, there's not really much room in Cuban families for Democrats. But
Fair enough.
I think it was more so what they're probably trying to express is that I came from a world, having been a director in Hollywood that was oppressively left leaning. And so me coming out and being very clear, and I always call it the term coming out. So that may, confuse some people, but the idea of somebody in Hollywood who's at the top of their game, directing Oscar-winning actors, actresses, some of the biggest music stars, coming out and being like, yeah, I'm Republican, I'm unashamedly conservative, and I'm actually, to the right when it comes to, where I am on the spectrum here. I'm in that America First populist lane. I think it's shocking to a lot of people because you don't see that from Hollywood. And it's also shocking in Hollywood. And that's why, I've been essentially blacklisted there because, I refuse to apologize. It's made all the more worse by the fact that I am a Latino because, the last thing Hollywood wants or the media wants or the Democrats want is a Latino who's standing up saying, we need to build a wall, we need an immigration moratorium and things along those lines. That's not helpful to their narrative. Meanwhile, we see a shift happening all over the country with Latinos where we're seeing them, just absolutely explode out of the Democratic Party and run over to the Republican Party. And I think that having strong Latinos on our side in the Republican Party being very vocal is a big reason for that. And so it's something that, I'm really proud that we made the choice we made to be very public and sacrifice my career for our values because, Cuban refugees many times, if you ask them, why did Cuba end up the way it did? And the answer you're going to get oftentimes is that, people didn't stand up when they had the chance. They were afraid of losing business or friends or whatever it was. And I don't want to have those regrets. I don't want to look back 20 years from now with my kids living in an oppressive country where they have very few rights and go, man, I didn't stand up and do anything when I had the chance to. And so, I think honestly, on my deathbed, no matter what happens from here on out, I think that'll be one of the things I'm most proud of is that I stood up, didn't really care about what would happen career-wise and everything. And that my wife, that I married such an incredible person, that they were pushing me saying, it doesn't matter what they do to you, I'm by your side. You be unapologetically you and be honest about where we're at in our country and what needs to happen. Because if you don't, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. And so, that having somebody like that, I mean, I feel incredibly blessed. And I think at the end of my days that'll be, at the top of my list of things that I'm very pleased with.
Well, I think that's a fair way to describe it and a great statement there. A couple things about that. First, that solves a puzzle for me because I was scratching my head when the person told me he used to be a Democrat and he's Cuban. I'm like, okay, Starbuck, that's not Cuban. That's why. But then I found out you're a Cuban American. I'm like, I don't know any Cuban Americans that are Democrats. In fact, most Cuban Americans I know detest socialism and Democratic Party. So, okay, so you've resolved that.
You want me to explain the Starbuck name? I can explain.
Yeah, sure, if you don't mind, real quick, because a lot of my audience won't know. It's a lot overseas. So go ahead.
Yes. So the Starbuck name, me and my sisters all got weird names. My dad got to pick our middle names, and they essentially became our last names because for various reasons, especially in my case, my Cuban side of the family's last names are Quesada and Cerati, which are much more, I think, Cuban, correct?
Yeah, it certainly sounds more Cuban to me than Starbuck.
But the making of my name was particularly odd because apparently it came to be for very bizarre reasons because my dad, and this is probably embarrassing to admit and will come back to bite me, but he was looking at the stars and then saw a male buck, or I guess a buck, it's always male, but male deer. And he fused the two together. He did that, and that's the explanation I got for my name.
Well, and that works. That's pretty good. That's actually, my name is not actually Chris. It's William Martin Wyatt, but I go by Chris Wyatt. And people are like, where does Chris come from? There's no Chris in there. I was born on Christmas Day as the short end of that story. So we both have nice origin stories there. I suppose we could be Marvel comic figures if it wasn't so woke. But anyway, but let me just mention something here very quickly that you were talking about there. There's a lot of people on the left are talking about, well, like Texas will be purple. It's guaranteed. We just heard AOC say that. And that's because of what I consider to be the oversimplification of the Latin vote in America, if there's such a thing. The Latino community is quite diverse, from Haitians to Cubans to Venezuelans to Mexicans to Costa Ricans, and also the old order Spanish families of the Tejanos of Texas and of New Mexico and Southern California. Very diverse community. And there's a lot of people that try to put everybody in one basket. And it's not working out that way. They're finding out that a lot of Haitian immigrants are not too happy with the Democratic Party. Most Cubans are not too happy with it. And even prevailing opinions in the Mexican American community have begun to change against the Democratic Party. Do you think my assessment is fair, or am I off the mark there?
Yeah, I would say they do misunderstand the complexity of, and I think actually this kind of happens on both sides. They kind of misunderstand the complexities between the Latino community. And I think that's kind of natural because it is sort of an odd deal. I mean, Cubans are very different from, let's say people who come from Mexico, very different sets of, even the way the Spanish that's spoken is different.
Exactly.
So some words don't make sense to each other and things along those lines. As part of the reason I don't do interviews in Spanish, because I don't want to be, it's one of those things you don't want to do an interview with somebody, they're in a different dialect and something weird comes out, because I don't speak Spanish every day anymore because I live in Tennessee. I raise my kids to speak English, I'm teaching them Spanish and my wife's teaching them French and all that stuff, but they don't practice it every day in daily life. So you don't want to go around and do interviews in that and then get embarrassed. But, in general, the complexities of it are pretty deep. And I think that they misunderstand a lot of things. I'd say, what would be sort of like the quick hit to cover that's sort of an example of how much they misunderstand it is this Latinx thing. Okay.
Oh, good Lord. Don't get me started on that.
they want to call all Hispanic and Latino people Latinx, and they want us to use it. They want the media to use it. They want academia. Everybody's using it, right? In academia and the media. Now, of actual Latinos, I have never met one in real life who uses the term Latinx, not one. They've done various polls on this. Even left-wing Think Progress did a poll on this. And in their poll, it found that 98% of Latino or Hispanic people were opposed to the use of the term Latinx. Okay. So only 2% were like, yeah, I guess that's okay. And in other polls, it's been 1% was okay with it. Okay. But yet, if you looked at the media, you would think that the entire Latino community was clamoring to be called this crazy term that's entirely made up. And it's made to degenderize the language, which is hilarious because the entire language is gendered. It's probably the most gendered language in the world.
Just like French and German. You rely on gender.
Exactly. And yet, this is what they choose to go do. It has alienated so many Latinos who don't really pay attention to a lot of the issues. Like, they're not like every day on news websites type of people, but they're socially aware of what's going on. And when you couple that with, hey, we're going to try to teach your son at school that tomorrow he can be your daughter, and that's science. In Latino families, that does not go over well. Okay.
Like a lead balloon.
It really doesn't. It's not a popular deal. And then, when they attack like these core values of parental rights, through CRT or forced masking, whatever it is, these are not popular things in the Latino community. Now, on top of that, hard work is a value in Latino families. And so when you then build an economy built around, essentially handouts, that's not popular in Latino communities in the way that it affects the economy. Also, things like gas prices or inflation, that's hitting Latino families really hard, so just like any other family. And so they're looking around at who's making this happen, and it's overwhelmingly Democrats. They're going, no, we've had enough. Let's try something new. And so people are kind of opening their minds. And I think a big part of it too is, though, seeing themselves in the people who are running. So let's take Virginia as an example. In Virginia, they flipped the Latino vote to a degree that nobody thought was possible. Republicans won 54% of the Latino vote in this last election. Now, it's not a coincidence that on that ballot, they had a Cuban running for attorney general in the state. Okay. That attorney general went to every Latino church, every Latino community in the state, and made the case for why their values were conservative values. You've got to meet people on a faith level in their community with the issues that matter to them. And you've got to also make sure that they can see themselves in your party, because those things matter in the Latino community. They do. Now, I'd be one of the first people to argue it shouldn't matter. Identity stuff shouldn't be what we're voting based on. But I'm a realist, and you can look at the polling and look at the results and see that, okay, it does matter when it comes to practice. When it comes to real life, it does matter to certain groups. So you've got to be cognizant of that and be very smart in how you sort of approach it. If you want to be a dominant party, you've got to be prepared to deal with those things.
No, absolutely. You make a fair point there. It's amazing how easily people come to conclusions that are not very well thought out or researched, or they don't really understand, like you talk about the Latinx thing. When I returned from Ethiopia a few years back to teach at the Army War College, we had interns that come from Ivy League schools all over the country, because I think it's prestigious to work as an intern at the War College in the summertime. And so we're talking about upperclassmen, undergraduates, and some master's candidates for all sorts of fields of study, but mostly in the social sciences. And this was when Freddie Gray and Trayvon Martin and all that stuff had just occurred, hands up in Ferguson, Missouri, all that was going on. And you could be pardoned if you were abroad and you thought that America was on the verge of a race war, was already engaged in a race war based on the reporting from the media. And so I came back and I would catch these interns at lunchtime, and they'd be talking and, try to do some mentoring, help these kids learn about, things going on at the War College. And invariably they'd be talking about all these issues of race in America. And the way they were talking, you'd almost think that they think that half the country was Black or African American. And so I said, well, let me ask you guys a question. And I did this repeatedly over the course of 3 summers, and it was astounding. These are educated, smart folks. And what we're getting is that most of them were telling me, well, Black Americans represent 40, 35, 45, 50%, 25, 30% of the population, when actually they make up 13.5% of the population. It just shows you the power of media and popular culture and how it influences people. And people don't take time to think about things. And that's probably what happens with those trying to take advantage of the Latin vote in America. That's, I think, really speaks a lot about what's happening in our society and how easily things are turned around there. But let me shift unless you want to respond to that.
I have a great little anecdotal thing for that.
Sure,
too.
Go ahead.
And it's that when the BLM riots were going on, there was actually a BLM protest. Surprisingly, our county is about 70% Republican, close to it. And there was a BLM riot in our downtown. And so I said, you know what? I actually ended up there by accident. And I said, you know what, honey, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to talk to these, because it was all young people. I mean, mostly high school, college kids. There were a few 30, 40-year-olds there holding signs and everything. And I said, I'm just going to go over and ask some questions. And I went over, I introduced myself, said, hey, look, I'm a Republican. I know that probably scares you at first, but let me ask you some questions. And I think you'll understand my positions here. And the question that I started with, and invariably I barely had to go to another question after this, is I said, how many unarmed Black males or Black females do you think have been shot by police in the last year? I got answers, 20,000, 10,000, 17,000. I got crazy answers, right? But this is the thing that we've got to be very, very cognizant of. They did not think these were crazy answers.
Yeah.
This is what they had been led to believe. The people who are evil and wrong here are not those confused kids. It's the media who has led them to believe that. It's the people who are in positions of leadership who've led them to believe that. So what I did is I showed them all how to go to the because I realized you want to reach these people, you've got to use sources they trust. So I say, go to the Washington Post police shooting tracker. Yep. They have a police shooting tracker. I want you to look at these numbers, and showed them these numbers aren't in the thousands. In fact, it's not even in the hundreds. Okay. You look at it, more white males were shot than Black males by police during that year when I was showing them these statistics. And I said, look, this is not to say there have not been one-off cases where there was a bad apple who did something wrong. Doesn't say that doesn't happen. The problem is everybody's out here pretending that our police, who are out here every day protecting us, are this group of rogue vigilantes who are out there just shooting people over the color of their skin. One of them had a sign saying, what is white privilege? It's if you have a broken tailpipe, that you live and don't even get a ticket while Black people are killed for it. And I go, again, show me multiple stories of people with tailpipes taillights being shot by police in our state. You can't show me any. It hasn't happened in our state.
No,
and
it's crazy.
So that opened a lot of eyes, and it actually led to at least one person that day on my live stream leaving the protest and saying that not only they were embarrassed, but that, it's making them reconsider other views they have, how they were led to this point.
No, you're absolutely on. It's spot on. That's the story I talk about all the time. I mean, all things being equal, in roughly 800 to 1,000 law enforcement firearm shootings and fatalities that occur in this country every year. That's an average number, about 800 to 1,000. The majority of them are white Americans, whatever white is. We can debate what white is, but they're classified as white Americans. But all things being equal, with 76% of the population being white, one would expect that would be the case. What's not taken consideration here is that the number for Black Americans tends to be around 400 or so or less, and context is taken out of it. These Black Americans aren't being hunted down in rural America by law enforcement officers. They tend to be shot in high crime areas in which police are called to a scene either for domestic violence or some sort of commission of a criminal act, and that's where it tends to take place. So I'm with you, spot on. That's something I share with people. So many things are misreported in this country, and like I said, and your story kind of lines up exactly the anecdotal story with mine about, people are acting as if, the majority or half of this country are Black Americans. There are 45 million Black Americans, and they should be respected and loved in this country. They're Americans, but this focus on things needs to be put in context so that people understand what we're really talking about here. But so much of this narrative has been distorted over the past couple of years, and it sounds like you've had the same conclusions that I've had in that regard.
Yeah, I would say, it's largely predicated on the media just giving people bad information and academia giving people bad information. Because like you said, misunderstanding a statistic on its face may seem trivial, but it leads to a lot of, sort of things down the road that don't make sense. Like those kids who answered me saying they thought 20,000 people were shot by police, but, Black Americans were shot by police unarmed. Obviously, a series of things happen in their life to lead them to believe that. It didn't just spark up in their head. And so, we've got to sort of question, one of the things that I question is about our own side is I feel like sometimes we say, oh, the media doesn't matter. They're not that powerful. They are still very powerful. And I think we have to acknowledge that they have a power to affect those young people that I met that day. And that's a powerful thing because those, many of the kids I met that day were actually, they weren't the far left crazy. These were kids who were raised in suburban area, very well educated, and they just were given bad information. So they'd be what we call traditionally very well educated because they come from a school with good standards to get into a good college. But the truth is they're uneducated in the most important ways. And that's the ability to think outside of the confines of the lines and the boxes that are put up for them as they're growing up in this new academic environment. And so in total, when you talk about percentages, like, another one that's interesting is if you ask the question to your average person from any political side, how many people in our country are consider themselves trans? You'll get numbers that are astronomical when the reality is it's less than 1%.
It's a fraction of 1%. Exactly.
And so when you look at that reality and you then look at the media and the focus on these issues, you go, wait a minute, you're spending more time on these issues than you are the fact that we have millions of people flooding into our country illegally over the past 12 months. Yeah. 150,000 of which are unaccompanied minors, and a third of those kids have been lost by the U.S. government, and they could be being trafficked right now, and some of them are, period. And so the fact that we're not focusing on those issues that are affecting our entire country versus small subsets, it speaks to a miseducation and a misprioritization. But so I think we're sort of on the same page there, that the media is leading people to believe things that aren't true.
Absolutely. And you touched on something else that I found much to my consternation, having spent most of that time in the military, 23 years overseas. I come back to the States on occasion for tours and then only permanently recently. And I find out that the country's changed in so many ways. Kids growing up, not even getting civics in junior high school or American government in high school. My own siblings who are younger than me, not even having those. And no wonder they're illiterate politically when it comes to how our system works. People are telling me that the Electoral College is outdated when it's a unique system, an ideal system prevents tyranny of the majority. We're unique in that aspect. Other countries around the world, 50+1, you subjugate the rest. Their opinion doesn't matter. And that's a pretty scary thing. But I'm not going to be able to have you much longer because I know you get another commitment tonight. So let me shift and we'll get you on the program later on, perhaps maybe on my radio program, Common Sense Conservatives. But let me ask you this. You're running in Tennessee 5, correct? That's the district you're running for. What are the key issues that you're running for to run for office there for Congress?
Well, I would encourage people, first step, to go to the website, starbuck2022.com, because there's a new contract with America there. Newt Gingrich is actually reposted on all his social media. I wrote a new contract with America that goes through 10 points that are critical to our country. But some of the areas they cover, like say in Tennessee, immigration, surprisingly, is the top issue. Okay. And immigration, when you look at it, you'd say, oh, well, you're not a border state. Well, the truth is all of our states are border states.
Yes.
And so that's something that, we truly, we've got to deal with. And I feel like I have an opportunity as a Latino to be sort of a barrier where the Democrats can't come after me and say, oh, you believe in this immigration policy because you're racist against Latinos. Well, I am Latino, so you can't credibly, I mean, they will, no doubt, they're crazy, but they can't credibly do it. And when the middle in our country looks at that, they go, oh, that sounds crazy. They're saying he's racist against Latinos, but he is Latino and his mom is an immigrant. Those things don't make sense in their head. And so I think that that's an area where we'll be able to do a lot of good. But on the outside of that, we have a lot of just kitchen table issues to deal with in America. And I think that we've got to deal with the economy. Number one, we've got just these incredibly disgusting omnibus bills that are 4,000, 5,000 pages long. No representative reads them, and they're destroying our country and our economy. We would not be in the position we're in right now with inflation or anything else if we did not do these omnibus bills. We need to get back to clean bills. That's step number one in my contract with America, because until we have clean bills, nothing else matters, because we're going to continue to waste incredible amounts of money that are going to damage our children and our grandchildren for generations to come. And so that's number one. But we've got to deal with our elections as well, but that's really more of a state issue. That's something I've talked about a lot on the state level that has to be dealt with. But we've got to also protect on the federal level to ensure that there are some things that we do need to get done. Like, let's say we do need a federal to make sure that we strengthen it so that we have a federal felony if you are found guilty of coordinated voter fraud that has serious jail time attached to it. If we don't, then there's no teeth. We need teeth in the system, because the minute that you see that somebody's put away in jail for 15 years for coordinated voter fraud, you're going to get some other people starting to question, should I engage in these practices? Do I really want to risk 15 years in jail for some warmonger like Hillary Clinton? I don't think that, I think for some people, they're going to weigh those and go, you know what, maybe no voter fraud this year, so.
Yeah, that's not for me. I'll take a back seat on that one.
That's an example of sort of the sorts of ways we could get involved with election integrity on a federal level without opening up the box of, craziness, where then you set a precedent for the Democrats to go and do other things, down the line. So we don't want to set precedent that helps them in any way. But we do want to do things to strengthen our elections. And I think that's critical to sort of regaining the trust. Now, we've got to also do things. I signed a public health pledge that essentially says that when I get in there, I'm pledging to be a part of a coalition of congressmen and congresswomen who agree that we need to change the salary of Anthony Fauci to $0, and we put an investigation against him. No, I'm dead serious.
No, I'm just laughing because I have no problem with that. The guy makes $400K a year.
Yeah, we've got to get it to $0 because he's been paid far too much, far too long, and he's got to be put under investigation immediately. And we've got to then follow up that investigation with actual action. Number one, on the top rope here, we know he lied to Congress. So we need to recommend charges. We've got to push and pressure the DOJ to actually get involved. I believe they will? Probably not. But we need to push them and prepare it so that can happen as we move into the next administration. Beyond that, we've also got to deal with the big tech issue. Censorship online requires an internet bill of rights, which is what I'm proposing. And that internet bill of rights would essentially treat social media companies the way we treat cell phone companies. It would require that they can't kick people off. They can't censor people. You just have open access to be able to state your ideas. Now, if your ideas are crazy and they're bad, guess what? People are going to jump all over you for those crazy bad ideas. But you have a right to the public square in our country. And the social media companies have become the public square. And so we've got to make that argument and get it into law. On the flip side of that, another issue we deal with is a parental bill of rights. Parental rights are being stripped all over the country. We've seen it especially through COVID, as states have tried to deploy these mature minor laws to vaccinate kids against their parents' wishes or to keep it secret from their parents. Same thing with gender transitions. They're trying to do that in some states now, like California, without talking to parents. We have to secure and make very clear within our law that parents are the ultimate arbiters of what is best for their children, not the state. And, then we go into CRT. I mean, there's so many issues, but you go to CRT, a very simple change we can make to the law And that's that any company, any public, any institution at all that takes public money. Okay, so if you take taxpayer dollars, you cannot teach, train, or deploy CRT in any facet. That will immediately affect every university in our country, public and private, because private ones take our money too. It'll affect Amazon, Lockheed Martin, any number of corporations. Pretty much every Fortune 500 corporation in America takes government funds of some kind. So they will then be hit with this. So you're no longer going to have Coca-Cola doing trainings with their employees saying, oh, could you be less white? That's in one of the Coca-Cola trainings for those who don't know.
I saw it. It was on LinkedIn.
That will no longer be allowed under the law, according to this bill, as long as Coca-Cola takes federal funds. We're going to find out very quickly where their virtues really lie, because it's very easy to virtue signal right now. But the minute that there's legislation that backs it up with real teeth, and you have fines and you have other issues that you have to actually contend with, I think we're going to see a whole new sort of, about face from these companies and institutions. So that's a small, taste of sort of some of the stuff, but I'm very motivated on a host of fronts. So if you go to our website, look at the issues at starbuck2022.com. You can even sign the new contract with America yourself. A lot of people have done that, and that's been a really valuable tool for us to be able to prove to other legislators or people running that this is what we need to be focused on. So anytime you sign it, you're helping us prove to other people running that they need to get on board with these ideas.
Well, that's pretty awesome. I'm going to have to take a look at your contract with America. That's fascinating. I can see that you're very motivated to make a difference. And it sounds like an exciting opportunity for Tennesseans to pick someone in the volunteer state to represent their interests and all of our interests from what you're talking about there. But there's two things that really come to mind. You start out with immigration. When we hear about America's anti-immigration, and they say the same thing about Voldemort, the person whose name we cannot mention on YouTube, but Voldemort there, the former president, when he was president, we hear this nonsense about his anti-immigration, yet America continued to naturalize 850 to 1 million Americans every single year when he was president. What country in the world lets 850,000 to 1 million people become members of its team every year? Not a country in the world. So that's nonsense. Yes. And then the second thing here is, we're not anti-immigration in this country, especially conservatives. We got no problem with people coming to this country and being part of the team, but you got to be part of the team. You can't come here and take advantage of us. You got to be part of the team. And so the second thing is that you mentioned that really comes to mind is that the social media, the tech titans, they are clearly in violation of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, Section 230, in which they were given freedom to blossom and flourish because they weren't considered publishers. So they're not held to the standard the Washington Post, New York Times, and others are held to with libel and such. So they can't be sued for content that content creators put on there as long as they use, reasonable means. If someone's, not advocating violence, you got to take them off. But censoring speech has made them an editor. When YouTube canceled my channel, that made them an editor, and that made an arbitrary editor. So they're in violation of the act, and no one has taken action against them. It's time for someone to do it. Sounds like you want to be one of those folks to get someone to hold these folks accountable in Congress.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd say on the immigration front, one of the proposals we have that I think you may like is that we have what's called the Citizenship Protection Act. And it's essentially very simple because, if you really look at immigration, one of the biggest problems is incentives are entirely backwards. If you live in Central America or Mexico right now, you've just spent the last 10 years being told by leading Democrat politicians across the country that not only you should come, but we're going to give you benefits to come. Okay. So you almost can't blame a lot of the people for being like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go take the free this and free that. Okay. So we need to change the incentives. And so the Citizenship Protection Act does exactly that. It essentially says if you are caught in our country illegally, you will never, under any circumstances, be able to become a citizen of this country, and you will never be entitled to any benefit in the United States of America. It makes it very clear, very to the point, and we make that, a big media campaign, essentially making sure that message gets across the border to these other countries so that they know that, hey, if you have any idea of ever wanting to come to America in any way, legally or on a visa to visit family or whatever it is, you need to do it the right way. You've got to go through a system where we verify that there's merit here, that you're not a criminal, that you've never done any terrible thing, that you go through the proper steps, that you believe, and this is the most important part, that you believe in American values, that you're going to assimilate. My family, they came here from Cuba not speaking English, and guess what? They learned English within 6 months, okay? They assimilated to the system. They fell in love with this country. They fell in love with freedom, and they love this country to this day. I mean, I have one living grandpa, and I'm not sure he loves anything more than he loves the United States of America, including myself. And so, that gives you an idea of how special this country is. That is what should be going on in the minds of anybody who wants to come here legally. And if it's not, we need to have very high standards that say, you know what, we are going to, it's kind of like your own home or your own children. Okay. We don't let just anybody into our house. We don't let just anybody date our kids. Okay. We are very cognizant of the fact that we want the best people. We want good friends who have good upstanding reputations that are there for the right reason. Same thing with if somebody wants to date your kid, you want to make sure they come from good values. They want to be there for the right reasons, things along those lines. We need to, at a minimum, require that same sort of thing for our country. If we don't, then we don't love our country. And so that's sort of the way that I've pitched that, is we've got to do that. But on the flip side of that, as much as I believe we've got to incentivize the legal process, at this critical time right now, we're in an economic crisis. We've had millions of people flood in illegally over the past year and a half. Okay. We have got to just get a handle on this and do a moratorium and close the border for the time being. Until we get a handle on our own country, our own economy, and everything else, we've got to be very firm and say, you know what, we've got to take care of our own people first. And then you can get back on the train of saying, okay, here's how we're going to do the legal process with merit and making sure we vet everybody who comes in.
Well, Robbie, I got to say, it's no wonder you had to leave Hollywood. Your love for America is just profound. Clearly, Hollywood's the wrong place for you at some point there. We could talk about immigration for hours, and I'd love to do that, but your time is very precious, and you've got another commitment tonight. But I do want to say this, when people talk about assimilation, they get the wrong idea here. It doesn't mean we're the Borg, resistance is futile. What it means is you contribute to this. To this day, we have unique communities in this country who are their own communities, but they're integrated in society. The Amish and Mennonites are clearly Americans, but they still speak, especially the Amish, German from the 17th century, and they practice their faith, they live their ways, but they pay taxes, they speak English, they contribute to society. We've also seen Quakers who avoided military service, but contributed to this country. And the old, as I mentioned, Spanish families of New Mexico and Texas in particular, Tejanos that have been there for 400 years in some cases. They speak Spanish, they speak English, they are part of America, they are America through and through. You can assimilate and retain the things of importance to your unique cultural contributions and inculcate them in your progeny, and they continue on for centuries. In fact, if it had not been for the racism and bigotry that was present in this country in the First World War by Democratic President Woodrow Wilson and his ilk, today, you would see German singing communities and choirs all over the East Coast. German newspapers would still exist to this day, given that 35 to 45% of Americans have German ancestry. That all died because of the bigotry of the First World War. My ancestors who were German were still speaking German 5 generations later in Baltimore until it was very dangerous to be anything affiliated with the Germans. My point is that you can assimilate and retain that uniqueness. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you absolutely can assimilate. And, even in my family being Cuban, we have our own food and our own traditions and things like that. But, here's a very simple but easy example. Like July 4th is just as important to my family as our own family tradition. So it's sort of you've got to love this country. It's honestly, it's not as challenging as a lot of people try to make it. It seems pretty simple to me that you've got to show that love,
Yeah, no doubt. Robbie Starbuck, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Candidate for Tennessee, 5th District there in Tennessee, the volunteer state. Robbie, thanks a lot. We'll get you back on the program. We have a chance to get you on camera and talk a little bit more in depth, maybe unpack this immigration and some of these other issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.